It had been 6 cycles since the distress signal had been sent into the vast emptiness of space. 6 cycles since the small chlorine colony, built on what should have been a perfectly safe and quiet planet with no intelligent life, had come under attack by pirates intent on cleaning them out of their resources, leaving 2,000 of the peaceful beings destitute and starving. 6 cycles of screaming children, starvation, sleeplessness, and fear, until finally, something came for them. Delac almost wished she could wait a few more cycles. What descended on the panicked crowd was what could only be described as a prop for some horror film no self-respecting viewer would take seriously. It looked to be made primarily of thick, heavy plates of metal bolted together to belide parts of a vacuum-sealed starframe vessel. It belched fire that threatened even after it died out to sear the fur from their famished bodies. It was a maddening construct of sharp lines and flat planes, and on its side were written 2 things, or more likely 1 thing in 2 languages. The first was a soupy sort of thick script that couldn't be read by any of the settlers there now, but the other was a simple script in Galactic Common TCR Babylon. TCR stood for Terran Collated Republic, the new calling card of a star cluster that was believed to hold no sentient life until recently. Deep in its recesses, nestled against a furious yellow star, was the ball of gravity and suffering that had produced the things of a slasher film director's most favorite dreams: humans. Even the socialists in chorus had heard of humans, how they cowed the cleft flare with mere cinema, crushed them as easily as children in a war, not even a single tile long. Giants that had sent the Pelfer slaving empire skittering to their holes with a stern look and a thick stick, vicious murder-obsessed things that made a point to eat anything at least 1 time, just to prove they could, sentient or not. And they were here. What for? Delac couldn't understand, couldn't comprehend what could possibly attract the most dominant Deathworld race in the galaxy to this pitiful little barren rock. Perhaps it had been the distress signal. Where other races saw a cry for help, had the humans picked up a signal for a buffet? It didn't seem likely, given the cleverness with which humans had brought other species under their wing with a single altercation, deeming the clones so far beneath notice that they didn't even have a voice in their conglomerate worlds, despite their prevalence in those worlds. Even the Cheatin had deemed them no threat, so why were they here? While Delac was trying to figure these things out, the metal thing began to settle on the ground in clear view of the refugees. As she watched, a panel on its floor opened up, and what looked at this distance to be an inky blot on the vista emerged. There were several other blots, and as time passed, huge numbers of them emerged. The chlorine settlers didn't flee in the face of this; they couldn't. This spot was the only one with atmospheric control enabled, as good as a cage for the moment. The pirates had shown as the crowd neared. Delac saw from her position at the forefront of the settlers what could only be humans. They ran the gamut of shades of brown, the one at the lead nearing solid black, while several behind neared almost comical white. Walking upright on 2 legs, they had 2 more limbs descending down, some of which were the width of her whole sorry body. She aspired with further terror, a single member of the titular cleft flash species, one reduced to 3 arms instead of 4. The darkest human, arguably the largest as well, locked his roving oculus on hers and picked up his speed until he was standing towering before her. She only barely managed to get herself to look up at him from around the area of his middle. "My name is Captain Darius Flynn. I'm captain of the TCR Babylon. We received your distress signal and came as soon as we could." His voice was a deep timbre that she assumed would be the sound of 2 massive stones grinding together. He was huge in nearly every part of his body. She picked up a distinct smell, which almost smelled like perfume or burning wood, that seemed to come from him. His pitch-black oculus, surrounded by white, were lashed onto her like a laser-guided weapon. Turning back the way he came, he gestured generally to the group and the ship behind him. "My crew here is going to help you get on board. With our cargo bay empty, this frigate has space to spare for all of you. We also secured emergency rations on the way, and the nearby platform system has agreed to house you. Do you have any injured?" "You're going to help us?" she asked breathlessly, unsure of her very existence in the shock. "Aye," he nodded, "to the best of our ability." "Why say it like it was so natural? How many other races would come out of their way for something like stranded chlorons? How many death orders would even take note of them?" "I am Delac, formerly the settlement's chief," she said, "and I speak for my people." Her relatively minor training as a diplomat took over and helped her muddle through her confusion. "We have a few injured, but we have not eaten in many cycles. The young are susceptible to starvation." The human captain, Darius, lowered himself so they could speak at a closer level, almost as one would to an equal. Holding her gaze, the captain said firmly, "Not on my watch, they won't." Standing back up, he gestured behind him, and a Chiton emerged from his massive shadow. "Greetings," the Chiton said in his chittering voice, highly welcome compared to the buffeting sound of the human. "I am Frastalin, the ship's operator. I will be your liaison during the evacuation, and to work with you and your items on your behalf within reason." "Always?" If ever there was one, scoffed the Cleflash, even as they picked up 3 of her people like luggage in massively strong arms. "I do not know what we must advise for the sake of these rodents." "Kizi, our employment contracts include clauses regarding aid. All human vessels operating legally are required to provide humanitarian support in times of need." "The captain's hands are bound, make no mistake, Frast," came that roiling voice again. "We'd be here to help, clauses or no clauses, and anyone who doesn't agree can stay here." He aimed a hard glare at the Cleflash, and she withered instantly, scurrying off to deliver her squirming payload. Delac still couldn't grasp what was happening. Why the captain really looked at her, inside, leaving the question unanswered, until another paler human spoke up, lifting an injured refugee, bed and all. "We're Marines, ma am, first in, always. I'm afraid we can't do very much for your people in the way of privacy," said Frast. "This space was designed to hold interplanetary freight. Its size is the only reason you can fit, but that also means there'll be no walls. That said, while you may not wander the ship randomly on the captain's orders, the human defecation chairs are available for you should you need to relieve yourselves, and there'll be several crewmates assigned at any time to help you and your people." Delac smiled wearily but gratefully at the Chiton, her own 2 little ones squirming under her talons. It was incredible how fast a couple of squirts of the nutritional paste they'd been provided could take the children from near death to wiggling ragamuffins. "Thank you dearly, Frast, and I will ask my people to do their very best not to be a bother to the crew. I'm afraid I have no control over the wiles of toddlers," she said, raising the wiggling fanny of her youngest as he tried to escape. He chuckled good-naturedly. "Do any of us? Be well, Delac, and stay safe." He gave a small bow and retired to his quarters, carefully avoiding the piles of wrestling bodies laying about. Delac and her people, following the near-full cycle required to get them boarded, treated, and gratefully fed, had been led into what would be their communal quarters for the duration of the trip. It was not dissimilar from the outside of the vessel, though notably cleaner, thankfully, in so much as it was a massive space of metal plates riveted and welded together. It was a show of stubbornness towards a galaxy that primarily used various forms of silicates and superplastics. Noticing what could only be described as a giant cage, being guided by the predators who owned it, Delac could not help but feel jittery and uneasy in spite of her rescue. This was a sentiment apparently shared by many. Everywhere she looked, there were the sparkles of open eyes marking her passage and warily eyeing the human guardians that had shown them such confusing kindness, too terrified of the rescuers to sleep in spite of their overwhelming exhaustion. They had all heard the stories, of course, and having seen the things in person did nothing to assuage their fears. The captain and his human crew could lift entire families over their heads with ease. It wasn't hard to imagine those same life-saving limbs squeezing the guts from them like prey. It didn't help that this place was so unbearably hot. Chloron gravitated to cold, and this storage facility was kept at a sweltering temperature. Mama chimed in, insistence under her rum, her eldest Klee, which her youngest Flo was quick to mimic. Delac bit back any attempts to scold them. She had gotten so near to losing them that perhaps she was afraid any harsh words would be her last to her offspring. "I know, Lavis, I know," trying to comfort them. She bounced her a bit, but to no avail, for every adjustment resulted in a rump being pointed at her somehow. "But we need to sleep now, please try to bear for a little while. That heart, I know. Delac, having reached her spot in the area, laid her children down and swaddled them in their blankets to keep them from escaping, and so eased herself down beside them to try and maybe get a bit of rest. It proved for naught, though her dreams were filled with brown skin and crushing white teeth. She saw her babies fall down the gullet of Captain Darius. Although he told her he was here to help, she screamed as she liked, but no sound would come. She ran to the cleft flash army that appeared behind her, leaving them to care and whimper, humans emerging in their ranks to rip off the yards of any who got in the way of their meal. Weep and quiver, there was all she could do as Captain Darius swallowed Klee, as he swallowed Flo, as she reached out for her, picked her up, and hung her over his gaping maw. Then he swallowed. Delac ripped from her fevered dream, searching for more than just the hard heat light, finding herself snap to snap with Braun, one of the other Chloron mothers. "What, Braun? What in the world is where are the children?" she asked, not demanding an answer, just begging for one, her heart sinking as it came to full panic consciousness. She walked about, finding a pair of empty, swaddling blankets in the spot where there should have been children. "You haven't seen them either? What did the guards say? How in the galaxy am I supposed to talk to those monsters?" "For all we know, they're the ones who took them," Braun replied. Delak had to fight every instinct that was telling her to agree, fight for an argument. "There are many things silence is not one of. Do you mean to tell me they strutted in here and abducted our little ones without a single eye spotting them?" Braun fell silent, unsure of how to respond. How could she? She had been among those designated to secretly watch the Watchers, yet the humans seemed to gather the intent behind having so many eyes on them. "Fine, I'll go ask," Delak snapped. She made a beeline for the nearest human guard, tall, unlike the others, with pale yellow hair and gemstone-like green eyes. "Human, sir," she asked. "I am." He answered quickly, and from his tone she could tell he knew something was amiss, but had hesitated to simply put himself in the midst of it. "Is there something wrong?" "Yes, several of our young have disappeared," she said gravely. "Have you seen them?" "I'm sorry, but no. You all are pretty small by our standards, so I'm ashamed to say they may have slipped by." He bowed his head in seeming shame and lowered himself so he could speak to her better, just like the captain had done previously. "I'll call out to the crew, let them know we've got some little ones out and about on the ship. We'll have all hands on search duty, I promise." "Oh, thank you very much," but she was hesitant to send a horde of super predators after hers and others' children. Who knew what could happen? The humans seemed to gather this and made another suggestion. "I guess having a bunch of strangers stomping around might be less productive than we might hope. If I'll tell everyone to keep an eye out, then give you permission to go after them yourselves, would that work?" he asked. "Oh my yes, thank you so much." The human's mouth curled up in some sort of smile, and he said, "No problem, I am. Skipper's responsible for anyone who steps on the boat, and that includes refugees." He returned to the standing position and retreated to the gap he had established, presumably to make the call he promised. Delak likewise retreated, rejoining her brothers and sisters in worry, to tell them what had been agreed upon. "Just you asked," one of the mothers. "No, I don't think so, but let's keep the search parties as small as possible. Best case scenario, the children are just restless after being on that sorry rock for so long. If you show up en masse, you may just scare them off." Of course one nodded, and Delak started digging out teams of 3. I've got permission from the captain. You and yours can search the ship, but if you need access to anything, you need to ask a crew member." Skipper had returned from his call, smoothly entering her circle and being funnily quiet about it. She couldn't help but notice just how many advantages this race needed. "The captain says they may have gone through the vents and access panels, but there's no way they'd be able to get very far that way. They'd have to have nested somewhere nearby. Do you have any idea what they might be up to?" Another mother asked. Perhaps Delak thought she knew where they might have been going. "My girls were complaining about the heat. They may have gone in search of somewhere cooler." Nearly all the parents nodded in agreement, Delak included. Skipper brought a hand to his chin and nodded thoughtfully. "All right then, nearest place downwards would be the captain's mess and coolant drums. Afterwards there's the crew mess, water chillers, and Genesis pub. Get a team for each, and I'll let them know you're on your way." Delak thanked him profusely and set the teams down their paths, herself heading afterwards with Braun and Han. Skipper led the way to their first location, the so-called crew mess. Without thumping on the metal door, utilizing strength that would likely crush any one of the mothers present, within half a heartbeat, Skipper called out to another human guard. "You in there? Come on. God, I know your ass ain't asleep. Open the damn door." From the other side of the metal barrier, Delak heard the huffing and puffing of the other human as they tried to answer the call. With another thump and a round of cussing, the titular cod opened the door. This human was shorter than Skipper, with hair down their back and a softer appearance overall. This one had a narrower chin and no facial hair like many of the others had, leading Delak to believe this was a rare example of a human female. As a matter of fact, she seemed rather attractive to Delak, or at least she would have, if not for the obvious scar that marred her face, changing its color from a reddish popped brown to angry pink along her mouth. Cod didn't seem to be terribly happy about the awakening either. Largely prick, "Do you realize you almost made me drop an entire box of salt into tomorrow's soup? You're gonna eat it. If I did, no time for the usual back and forth, of course. Let's skip the schmoozing and the sweet nothings." Skipper's response was quick and terse, seeming to clue Cod into the seriousness of the situation. "These little ladies here have a gaggle of kids," he gestured to Delak and her company, to which Cod gave a surprised jump. "I think they may have been looking for somewhere to cool off. I need you to show them the fridge and freezer." Ha, no way. No, how declared Cod to the sinking fear of the Chloron mothers. They don't even make nets for that much hair. You expect me to brush every hunk of meat I take out from that one? No buts, Cod. You'll open the door for them. You don't have to let them in necessarily, just make sure nothing snuck in while you were focused on your soup. Cod rubbed the back of her head in silent exasperation, mulling it over for a painful amount of time. Yeah, all right. I'll show them. And Cod looked down at Dillac and her posse and gestured her head into the room, making way for them to file in. As they went inside, Skipper said his farewells and returned to his duty. God and the group. Cod took a point and led them further inside. Did you hear that? She was going to put salt in tomorrow's soup. She was poisoning the food for the whole crew and says it like it's nothing. What if the children got into something like that? I'm more worried about the other thing, muttered Han. Perhaps the sins of their forebears. Cod made an effort to put them at ease, though it was clearly lacking the skill for it. Sorry about earlier saying you can't come in at all. Wasn't that I don't want you to find them? It's just cleanliness is a big part of my job, and you look like mice. So what's a mice? Asked Han. An animal from Earth. You just look like them, just a few shows bigger and a few more shows better dressed. Oh, and what role do these creatures serve on Earth? Not really, just vermin. Oops. Realizing too late that she compared 3 intelligent beings to the sort of creature to be exterminated on sight. Cod attempted to apologize but found all 3 rooted in place, Han and Bron cowering behind Dillac. I didn't mean you were vermin, she hastily explained, just that you look kind of similar. You can talk and have clothes and such, so you've got nothing to worry about from me, swear. Except you just admitted that we look like something you normally wouldn't hesitate to murder. What a terrifying race, Dillac muttered. It's fine, I think. Can we just find the children? She said aloud. Yeah, sorry about that, grumbled Cod. She continued to lead them in and behind the large metal counter that, to Dillac, looked like the most secure vault a bank could buy. My word, I thought this place a kitchen, exclaimed Bron. What valuables could you possibly want such a door for? And what sort of punishment would sneaky children who found their way inside get? Dillac added in secret. Cod bared her teeth, not noticing the flinch of terror that ran through her guests. Ladies, you're on a naval vessel. What's in this room is more valuable here than any gold, jewel, or Playboy magazine in the universe. Without further ado, Cod shanked the door open, clearly utilizing the whole of her body to swing the massive lump of metal into position that would allow them to pass. All 3 were hit with a blast of air so cold it stunned in shock of their previous toastiness, the very air turning to white vapor in the sharp contrast. Within was the treasure in question, tubs of colorful stuff that looked to weigh roughly the same as Dillac herself. Ice cream, finished Cod. The 3 guests stood in awe of the room, relatively small but packed to the ceiling with what had been described to them as the greatest treasure humanity had for its shipping vessels. Eyes wide, they basked in the unexpected cold and the unexpected honor. Yes, said Cod, rubbing her manipulating digit under her oculus. I get like that when I see it too. After a moment for herself to appreciate it as well, Cod stepped in front of the group. You wait here. I'll check about. She made to turn around and enter the room but stopped herself with a realization. Actually, while I'm in there you'll check around out here. I don't see how something so little could get inside, but the wall and door are pretty chilly themselves, so they may have snuggled up out here. Herpy, said Cod, entering the chamber. Dillac, Han, and Bron did as suggested and checked the perimeter. After a few short moments they heard a cry from Bron, prompting Dillac and Han to come running. There, nestled in a bundle behind some boxes braced against the wall in the pile, were 5 of the missing children. You find them? Asked Cod, ringing back out with swift thumping steps. Unfortunately, the yelling and heavy footsteps of the human alerted the children. All of them woke at once to gawk at her. Cod made it closer than Dillac had, and from the opposite side, Dillac got a perfect view of Cod glancing down at the children, her skin turning visibly pale. Ah. That little sound was all it took for the children. Like the little hellions they were, all 5 bolted, trying to get away from their mothers so hard they managed to rush straight for poor Cod. Cod, for her part, went ramrod straight, then, trying to backpedal away from the children, tripped and fell flat on her rump. Han and Bron had no such issues. Last one to stand before me gets a whipping like they'd never believe. Bron yelled as loud as she could, and Han pulled a switch out of nowhere, switching it about, eliciting a terrible noise in its wake. 1, 2, 3, 4. Like the mice they so resembled, several of the children scurried over and stood obediently before their mothers, heads down and shivering in fear. Delac noted with anxiety that this wasn't anywhere close to all of them, that neither of her own were present. She went to Cod, who hadn't moved from where she fell, still white as a sheet. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked. "Fine, just ... God, well, I've been back in New York." Delac, unsure what to do, simply reached out and patted the giant on her now reachable shoulder. Just then, a hopeful scream cried out from the cold storage box that Cod had left open behind her, repeating every few breaths. Delac and Braun bolted, while Han stayed with the captured children. Delac could hear the human getting up behind her, even though she scurried to the source of the screaming. Entering the company frigid box, past the towering sacred ice cream, and into a cycloid door she hadn't been able to see from the outside. To that pursuit, the sounds of the whimpering child catching sight of the little girl, she leapt in and covered her with herself, covering her eyes and pressing her to her breast to protect the poor thing from whatever had terrified her so. She needed to look up and wish someone would do the same for her. What a meat locker came the grumble of racing nations somewhere to the rear, hanging all around her. Suspended from hooks and torn bare of skin and guts, were rows and rows of carcasses and severed limbs. Then the car swung, caused by all the rushing about, seemed to indicate a lingering sense of life to the things in this ring. Delac dared to look to her rear. Cod, a difficult expression on her face, had blocked Braun from entering and seeing the terrible scene for herself, her breath crystallizing in the air. Cod stepped in after Delac, and the child still whimpering in her arms. That's right, Cod was a human, a predator, the most dominant predator on the planet, full of beings so inherently powerful that even its weakest member had donned the title death rates almost as soon as they'd been discovered. Delac had nowhere she could run from this being, this thing, nowhere to protect her and the child in her arms from its merest whim. God came over them, then her long limbs seemed like the bars of a cage as she bent down to it, wrapping them around Delac. Delac did the only thing she could think of. As soon as one of the limbs entered her field of vision, she snapped out with her teeth and bit it. There was a jerk as Cod attempted to remove her limb from the bite, a brief shudder which threatened to snap Delac's neck as she refused to let go, only for the withdrawal to cease in her teeth. Delac could feel the power flowing through the woman, could barely break her skin, recorded hardened muscles repelling her completely, and she could feel every twitch Cod made trying to rip her teeth out. Cod knelt down and began stroking Delac's cranial fur, the slow, smooth strokes somehow comforting. Delac didn't let go of her bite, but she did let go of her restraint and began to cry in confusion and fear. Amidst this confusion, Cod knelt down and, with a rubber arm, scooped up Delac and her charge in one single go, holding them like Delac might one of her children. "Shush," she said, stroking her around from Delac's mouth and still making sure Braun didn't see either, exiting the meat locker, then the freezer altogether. It took a few moments for Delac to finally calm down, during which she allowed herself to be held by the most powerful being she'd ever known, from whom this fear had sprouted. "You gotta understand." Humans whispered, "Humans gotta eat meat, can't survive otherwise." There was a point where we tried as many alternatives as we could think of, but biology can't be beat. But please remember, we ain't monsters either. We're thinking, just like you, and wouldn't dream of eating anything that thinks, feels, or talks. Them's just rations from our home planet. We mean you no harm, and every single one of you is going to make it too painful if I've got anything to say on the matter, just like Captain Darius. But why? Something like that is the norm for them, so why should it matter where the meat they need comes from? Sorry, whispered Delac. Sorry, it took nearly a half hour for both Delac and the girl to calm down, during which Cod banished her ram. Delac made it clear she would accept any consequence for the injury, but Cod said it was no issue, and she didn't blame her. It took some time to explain the concept of animal farming and cold storage, but both Delac and the girl eventually were made to understand that none of them or their families would ever be in danger of being hung up with those hooks. Braun and Han gathered up the children and returned to the group. Delac insisted on continuing on to find any more good news. "There won't be any more meat lockers for you or them to stumble into," Cod said after it was decided she would take Delac to her next location. "Bad news, not even I can get you into the water chillers. It's a control room, and only designated personnel can get inside." Delac thought to herself, with this bit of information, sorry, but we gotta leave that one to the boys, though it's really unlikely any of them squirts of yours got in there. "I'll get you to Genesis Pub. I can't really help past that, got a crew of about 150 to feed on tomorrow's shift, and I'm behind as it is." Delac expressed her understanding and allowed herself to be led to the place in question. It was a fair ways further into the ship, down and up several flights of stairs, and they even found 1 or 2 children napping under AC units on the way, but eventually they made it to Genesis' pub. Cod knocked on the door and bade her farewells, departing just in time for the automatic door to open. "Come in," said another human voice, following the sound where, if any shocks either one should receive, spending time with Cod, Delac made her way inside, immediately struck by the chilliness of the room. As she entered, the first thing she saw was the children indeed. The remaining 20 or so missing children of every age were sleeping soundly in the room, splayed about on tables, counters, and chairs. At the far end there was another human, but this one was different than the rest. Whereas every other human Delac had met had been brimming with strength and vitality, the female seated across from her seemed diminished somehow. Her hair was pale and faded into gray, her skin seemed pallid and hung loosely in spots. The only thing that Delac could be sure was the same with her: the eyes. Every human she had met so far had a sort of inner strength that radiated from within through their eyes. This one's mouth pulled into the same smile Skipper had made before. "Welcome, dearie. I've been expecting you for some time now." Shocked at first, staring, Delac quickly introduced herself. "Ah, so you are little Clee and Flo's mother, are you?" she asked, and the names of her children made her realize that the little ones in question were loud and uncomfortably on the woman's lap. Immediately embarrassed, Delac began apologizing and rushing to take them from her. "Oh, it's no trouble, really. I've had several little ones of my own over the years, so I knew the terror of a toddler." Even still, Delac couldn't help but worry. Even this fragile example of humanity could have crushed her children at any time. And there would have been nothing anyone could do to stop it accepting the girls from the woman. Delac breathed a sigh of relief as soon as her babies were back in her arms. "My, that was trying, wasn't it?" asked the woman, Janice apparently. "Yes, for many reasons, one can't help but picture the worst when their child is in the custody of a monster," after all she said. "Along." She'd let her inner feelings show. Delac moved to apologize and hurriedly correct her, but Janice was apparently not offended in the least. "Oh no need to apologize. You're right after all about us," she said. Sure to the admission, Delac was at a loss for words. "Now, don't get me wrong, I would never eat you, nor would I suffer harm to come to any of these little dearies, precious as they are, but we are predators, vicious deathworlders through and through." I don't understand." Well, a predator isn't necessarily a wild beast, is it? Humans are creatures of strength and violence, and we're admittedly quick to anger, but nobody in the universe can say we're angry all the time, yes? I think what you've allowed yourself to get hung up on is what we can do, not what we would do. Tell me, have any of the human crew members threatened you? Have they made any attempt to harm you? No. As a matter of fact, Delac had to admit, the humans were the most gentle, kind, and accommodating people she'd ever interacted with. "That would be a matter of humanity," Janice offered. "Please remember, everyone on this ship is human, excepting some of our Xeno associates, but we don't define our humanity by our physical capabilities. There are deformed and crippled humans with as much right to the title as our hale and hearty captain. What we can do, the violence we are capable of, is what qualifies us as vicious deathworlders, but we define our humanity by the choices we make." For instance, she reached down and gently rubbed the head of a sleeping child, coaxing her back to slumber as her friend awoke due to their conversation. Smiling at the young one, she stood and nimbly stepped over them to get an object at the back of the room, a large padded cart. What it could be useful for, Delac couldn't guess, but she couldn't have been happier to see it. As she began piling the children into it comfortably, with Delac's help, she continued on. "There is not a man or woman on this ship that will hesitate to offer their life for that of your children, myself included. It is a similar thing that drove this frigate to abandon its cargo and pick all of you up in spite of the loss to profit. Humanity is something we demand of each other, not something all of us are necessarily born with." With the last child secured in the cart, Janice began pushing the ridiculous trolley out the door into the hallway. The children, by the way, were very vocal about all this. That's why I thought it important to discuss with you. Of course they were. As they made their way back down the hallway, picking up kids and adding them to the litter as they went. Delac and Janice continued to speak more comfortably and openly than they had at the beginning. Janice explained that the reason so many kids wound up with her was because her room was a research center. It was temperature-controlled and maintained in a very chilly temperature for the sake of the volatile chemicals she needed to work with in her attempts to adapt human biological defense mechanisms to xeno diseases and environments. She found the children wandering about aimlessly and recognized the signs of heat exhaustion, so she piled them up and rushed them to the room for their health. For her part, Delac discussed some of what her people had been through, and Janice likened them to a culture from Earth known as gypsies, wanderers with poor reputations, but strong cultures. She said that most humans would likely like them quite well, as a matter of fact, and suggested her people seek a partnership. Delac was surprised to learn that not only was Skipper Cod's husband, but Cod was also Janice's daughter, and that she had a little one of her own somewhere on the ship. "I'm very sorry about all this, the things so many would find their way to you," Delac sighed. Janice smiled gently and continued to speak. "Oh, it's fine. We aren't particularly well equipped, and my work is at a standstill anyway, so if anyone needs a break, do feel free to bring them by. As a matter of fact, I'll talk to the captain about having my room serve as a nursery for the duration of your stay." Having finally arrived at the storage room housing her people, Delac had the parents come over and collect their kids so Janice could return to her room and get some sleep herself. Before leaving, though, she offered one last word of advice. "It might help if you don't think of yourself being trapped by Deathworlders, but in the protection of humans, if it helps." Delac sighed, her stress and fear finally gone for the first time since she had woken up that boiling 6. No, it was past 7 cycles now, wasn't it? "Yes, I think it does. Thank you for everything." So that's what it was, Delac thought as she carried her kids back to their blankets, laying down for what was sure to be a restful sleep. That's what I didn't get. It's what the captain was talking about, and why they all treat her so well. They're not just Deathworlders, they're humans. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them, thank you for your time.